Members in this chamber should be embarrassed, Presiding Officer.
I call Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Parents of ASN pupils protested outside North Lanarkshire Council last year. They said that teachers and pupils are being failed by an education system that does not recognise the specialised skills needed for children with additional support needs. Many school-aged children end up being placed in mainstream educational schools, despite meeting criteria for an ASN school due to the lack of schools available. So what is the Minister's response to the many families in North Lanarkshire being failed by the education system due to the lack of specialised schools and facilities for ASN pupils?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for her question. Of course, it's worthwhile putting on the record that we are seeing record levels of investment in additional support needs pupils through pupil support assistance. That's because of ring-fence funding coming directly from the Scottish Government. The Government also ring-fences £50 million worth of funding to protect additional support needs support in our schools. But in general, of course, as I alluded to in the response to the original question, the school estate is the responsibility of local authorities. We work with local authorities where we are able to do so and to prioritise the needs of additional support needs pupils. And it is worthwhile saying that some of the funding that we announced back at the end of last year is going to improving the school estate for additional support needs pupils.
Question number 3 is not lodged. Question number 4, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has for any major rail development projects beyond the end of 2024.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Scottish ministers remain firmly committed to infrastructure investment as a key factor in securing economic growth and high-quality public infrastructure across Scotland. That has been made much harder due to cuts in our capital budget imposed by the UK Government. The Scottish Government's investment in Network Rail's operations, maintenance and renewals for Scotland's railway will increase by £0.45 billion from £3.75 billion in the 2019-24 period to £4.2 billion throughout 2024 to 29. We continue to progress a pipeline of enhancement projects, and the member may particularly note the planned electrification of the line from Glasgow to East Kilbride, which is targeted to be delivered by December 2025.
Sue Webber.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response and outlining some of the pipeline developments that are coming forward. But she will be aware that residents of Winchborough are weary of the continued shirking of responsibility by the SNP Green Government to build a train station in their town. On the 8th of March, the Minister Jim Fairley wrote to me that his understanding is that West Lothian Council is responsible for organisation and invitations for the multi-stakeholder meeting. However, West Lothian Council first wrote to the Scottish Government in June 2023, and it was only yesterday they received a response committing to a date for this meeting. Given that Winchborough train station isn't developer-led, the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland must take charge and lead on this. Cabinet Secretary, now that the Minister has agreed to the meeting, can you assure us that building this station will be a priority for this Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
As the member well knows, I am the constituency MSP for Winchborough, and in that constituency capacity, I have long campaigned for a station which was always to be developer-led. To avoid a conflict of interest, I am recused from having any involvement in government interests on this matter, but I can still act and will still act on such issues as the constituency MSP. As such, I will ask the lead minister to write to the member to address her concerns as is appropriate, and the point about the meeting, if she's had a reply to that, I'm glad to see that progress.
Brief supplementary, Kenneth Gibson. Thank you,
Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary believe that the London to Birmingham High-Speed Rail 2 project, now expected to cost an eye-watering £583 million per mile, benefits Scotland in any way whatsoever, and if so, how?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, since 2009, this Scottish Government have reconnected 16 communities to the rail network, with new stations and 2 more stations planned to open this year. But the eye-watering HS2 curtailed project will have limited, if any, benefit to Scotland, and the collapse in capital spend elsewhere by the Westminster Government harms the economy and harms Scotland.
Brief supplementary, Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister will be aware that East Lothian is one of the fastest growing areas in Scotland and that Haddington is one of the fastest growing towns locally. The Rail Action Group of East Scotland is campaigning for the reopening of Haddington's branch line. Will she agree to look carefully at this campaign and their calls and look to get Haddington back on track onto our rail network?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm aware of the campaign in Haddington, and I know the member and also the constituency MSP Paul McLennan have pursued that issue. I think it's really important to address the interests of communities. It can take some time, as we are aware, to develop such plans, but clearly I will ask my officials to look and be aware of the Haddington developments along with colleagues at Network Rail and ScotRail.
Brief supplementary, Willie Rennie.
The Cabinet Secretary told me last November, the 2nd of November, that we'd get a response to the Newborough Stag transport appraisal in a few weeks' time. It's now months later. When are they going to hear about their success in Newborough?
Cabinet Secretary.
So my officials at Transport Scotland have met with Sestran and representatives of their consultants and the Newborough train station group on the 16th of January to discuss the Newborough detailed options appraisal report for that transport appraisal. This appraisal is considering a range of multimodal transport options, including a station at Newborough. They have requested further information underpinning the detail presented within the report, and once that additional information requested from Sestran, the promoter of the appraisal has been received and considered, Transport Scotland's official will provide feedback on the appraisal report.
Question number 5, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to ensure that Scotland's further education sector is aligned with the needs of businesses within the renewable sector and other industries associated with the green economy.
Minister Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, our education and skills system is already adapting to the transition to net zero, and institutions like colleges are key anchors. Funded by the SFC Energy Skills Partnership, act as the college sector lead for the transition to net zero and directly supports institutions to develop their capability, capacity and curriculum pathways for the transition. ESP also engages with employers on behalf of the sector, establishing partnerships across the further education sector and industry to enable the green economy.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? This week I visited, for Apprenticeship Week last week, I visited electrical engineers in Kilmarnock, Aird, Walker and Ralston. And they said that their sluggish lack of growth is actually a problem because they struggle to recruit the appropriate apprentices. And they say the biggest problem is that school pupils are unaware of potential careers through apprenticeships like electrical engineering. Colleges have the capacity to deliver the engineers we need for the green economy. It seems there is a missing link between schools, business and colleges. So can I ask us what the Scottish Government can do to ensure that career guidance includes the opportunities that apprenticeships can bring in the growing green economy?
Minister.
Officer, Brian Whittle raises a really relevant point. Promotion of green skills as career options for young people is incredibly important. I was at Nescall in Aberdeen on Monday where we were discussing just that issue, ensuring that young people are encouraged to consider energy and other such careers as long-term career opportunities. The Career Service absolutely has a role to play in that, of course it does, but I think alongside employers, working in conjunction with employers, perhaps offering work experience opportunities, as well as working with the colleges to shape the curriculums. I'm happy to engage further with Brian Whittle on that matter.
Question number 6 has been withdrawn. Question number 7, Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taken to improve the accessibility for disabled people at train stations in Dumfries and Galloway.
Cabinet Secretary.
Dumfries Station is currently being upgraded with a new footbridge and lifts to make access to the platforms easier. Whilst the accessibility of stations is a matter reserved to the UK Government, the Scottish Government is fully supportive of and engaged with this project. My officials are independently progressing Recommendation 19 of the Strategic Transport Projects Review 2, reviewing station accessibility across Scotland, including in Dumfries and Galloway. The review is anticipated to complete in spring 2024, and whilst it is too early to comment on any outcome to the review, Recommendation 19 reinforces the Scottish Government's commitment to improve access for all to Scotland's rail network.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, President Officer. Even after the work at Dumfries Station, almost half of the stations in the region will still not be fully accessible. Kirkconnell Station in particular has no disabled access whatsoever to the southbound platform. It means my constituent who is in a wheelchair had to travel and stay on the train from Glasgow to Sankar, then change at Sankar and get a train back to Kirkconnell northbound because they couldn't get off the train
at Kirkconnell. Now, we've had feasibility studies on what's needed to end this discrimination against disabled people, but what my constituent wants to know is when will we see action to see Kirkconnell Station fully accessible?
Cabinet Secretary.
So as I set out in my original answer, this is reserved to the UK Government, and the DfT are undertaking that detailed accessibility audit. I appreciate his frustration. I think he sets out the concerns of his constituent very well, and I will do what I can within my powers to ensure that once that audit has been completed, that the identification of the work and the priorities is progressed.
Question number 8, Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the creation of a national online support platform to expand music learning for children and young people in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
This Government has transformed instrumental music tuition in Scotland schools by funding councils to eradicate unfair music tuition charges. This financial year, we are providing £12 million to continue this commitment. The most recent instrumental music survey, published in December of last year, shows that the number of pupils participating in instrumental music tuition is at a record high since the survey began 11 years ago. Since 2007, we have invested over £150 million in the Youth Music Initiative, helping young people across Scotland to access music and develop their wider skills and learning. And schools across Scotland today already have access to the national e-learning offer, supported by £1.5 million of investment from the Scottish Government. And this includes a range of online learning materials, recorded lessons and live lessons on music.
Neil Bibby.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Music and the arts should be for everyone, and it's clear we need to do far more to create opportunities for working-class children. In Wales, the National Music Service, working with Chiranga, has developed a national bespoke online support platform to not replace existing instrumental tuition, but to help non-music specialist teachers to expand music learning in schools. For a relatively small cost, we could make that transformative change here in Scotland too. So can I ask the Minister, would she agree to meet with me to discuss and explore that proposal?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm happy to meet with the member to listen to any contributions he might have in this space, but I would just put on the record, Presiding Officer, as Education Scotland have already advised, what is being proposed, as I understand it from Welsh Labour, is very similar to the current offer that we have nationally in relation to the online ELO platform and also on Glow. That's available to all local authority areas in Scotland, but I'm more than happy to meet with the member on this. And it is worth putting on the record, of course, it was the SNP in government who removed fees for instrumental music tuition, making it free to all pupils. And I would remind the member that the reason we had to do so was because some councils, including Labour-run councils, decided to introduce charges, seeing parents billed up to £300 per year.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week marked the start of Ramadan for Scotland's Muslim community, and I'm sure the whole Chamber will join me in wishing everyone observing Ramadan peace and happiness. For years, drug deaths have been Scotland's national shame. This week it emerged that drug deaths have risen again, up 10% on the previous year. Humza Yousaf's new Minister for Drugs, Christina McKelvey, was asked for her response. She said the plan is working. Surely the First Minister can't agree with that.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I also wish Muslims here in Scotland, across the UK and right across the world a happy Ramadan, though my thoughts are often with those in Muslim communities who are fasting or cannot access food or water, not out of choice because of their fasting for Ramadan, but because of poverty or indeed conflict. Presiding Officer, in terms of the drugs deaths, let me say first and foremost that my condolences and the condolences of the entire government are with every single person that has lost a loved one to suspected drugs deaths. But we know, of course, from engaging with those families, it's not warm words, it's not words of sympathies or condolence they want, it is action. And I am devastated to see that rise, particularly as, of course, we saw and witnessed some progress in the year before with a reduction in suspected drugs deaths. This is a deep-rooted endemic problem in our society, and what I would say to Douglas Ross is that we are taking a range of significant actions to try to tackle this insidious problem in our society. We're absolutely committed. We have an unwavering, unshakable commitment to the national mission to tackle drugs death, and that's why we've continued to expand residential rehab, and I can give some more detail of that in subsequent answers. We provided £50 million a year to community and grassroots organisations that are helping those in their local areas suffering with substance abuse and addiction. We've progressed work with local authorities like Glasgow and safer consumption rooms. We've continued to roll out the carriage of naloxone and drive up the MAT standards, as well as a range of other actions. And what we'll continue to do is make sure that we maintain the drugs budget as well for 24-25. So this rise is deeply disheartening. This rise in suspected drug deaths is deeply disheartening. But what it will only serve to do from a government's perspective is ensure that we continue to rededicate ourselves and recommit ourselves to tackling one of the most insidious challenges and problems that we face in our society.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister referenced last year's figures, and at the time, the former Drugs Minister said in August last year that the government was turning the tide on the drug death crisis. We now hear from the current Drugs Minister that even with a 10% increase, she believes the plan is working. It is absolutely not. Drug deaths in Scotland have consistently been the highest across Europe, and they're on the rise again. The SNP plan is not working. And they seem to be repeating the same mistakes all over again. Nicola Sturgeon let a rehab facility in her own constituency close in 2019. Now Humza Yousaf has let Turning Point 218, a vital rehab service for women in Glasgow, close. The head of justice at Turning Point Scotland said this: "The loss of this service is likely to lead to more women in custody and trapped within the justice system." And the First Minister himself said in this chamber just in January that it does excellent work. He continued, "I value the project very highly." Just a few weeks later, it closed. So why did this happen?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I just give an absolute confirmation that the Drugs Minister, Christina McKelvey, and I, during our visit to the Bothy, an excellent community project based in Craigmillar, the Minister for alcohol and drugs policy absolutely believes, as I do, that we have to rededicate ourselves and take further action because we know, of course, that rise is unwelcome. And Douglas Ross is right to say that our numbers of suspected drug deaths per head of the population is higher than other parts of the UK. Other parts of the UK have also seen a rise, and I suspect part of that is because of the tide that we are up against. That is, of course, seeing more potent, stronger, more addictive substances on our streets, such as synthetic opioids, nitazines, and so on and so forth. But there is absolutely no complacency about the action that we have to take. In relation to 218, Presiding Officer, it's an important issue that is raised. It should be said that was a council decision, not our decision, of course. The only decision that we made from a Scottish Government perspective was when Glasgow City Council asked whether or not they could retain the £1.5 million funding for retendering to another service. We said that we would allow them to retain that money, to be able to use it flexibly. It would also not be correct to say that there aren't facilities for women in particular that are facing substance abuse in Glasgow. There's a whole range, and I'm happy to release the letter that we received from the Health and Social Care Partnership. We have tomorrow Women's Group, a community-based service for women involved in the justice system. We have the Glasgow Drugs Court, which we know operates a women's-only clinic a day a week. We have Glasgow has 59 purchased residential placements that are both for men and women in alcohol and drug recovery services. There's 60 tenancy-sustained placements specifically open to those in justice social work.
First Minister.
A gender-specific community support service. And there are other services which I'm happy to talk to and further answer. So what I would say is we continue to provide record funding this year to alcohol and drugs partnerships. We'll continue to take actions with our local authorities. And of course, I'm happy to continue to work cross-party, as my predecessor did, work cross-party, in order that we all collectively work together to tackle what is one of the most challenging issues our society faces.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister wants to dodge responsibility for the closure of this vital service that has served women in Glasgow for 2 decades. So let's just listen to what the Unite Regional Officer Linda Wilson said. This is her words. "It's utterly shameful that both Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government believe the best way to help vulnerable women is to cut beds and slash the funding of a lifeline service. And newspaper reports today include emails that suggest the Government was aware that Turning Point would be closed but didn't step in to prevent it. Unite say it was crystal clear that the Scottish Government was central to the decision-making process which led to the 218 service closing. Humza Yousaf is trying to avoid responsibility. He's using the same excuses as Nicola Sturgeon. So why are the SNP making the same mistakes all over again?
First Minister.
Well, let me try to, of course, inject also some of the facts into this discussion, Presiding Officer. We are not cutting beds. Under the Scottish Government, we've invested £38 million in expanding capacity in residential rehab as part of the national mission. We, of course, have 32 of these beds are operational. We have another 38 in the pipeline just over the next few months. And with the projected funding that we have, we believe we're absolutely on track to meet our commitment on increasing overall residential rehab capacity from 425 to 650 by 2026. We're also very much on target in relation to the targets that we've set ourselves for publicly funded rehab placement. So this suggestion, as Douglas Ross made it, that we're cutting residential rehab beds is simply not true. In terms of the decision that was made by Glasgow City Council in 218, again, I'm happy to release these letters if they have not been released already. If I go back to what one of our officials or civil servants wrote to Glasgow City Council, and I'll quote directly from the letter, Presiding Officer, we consider that any decision to re-tender the service, that's the 218 service, is entirely a matter for Glasgow City Council, but can confirm we have no objection to the replacement service utilising the funding currently allocated to the 218 service. So we, of course, did the right thing by ensuring that funding was flexible for the local authority. And what we now see, of course, that in Glasgow City Council, there are a range of initiatives that are still available for women to be able to access, whether that's, for example, the Lilius Community Custody Centres based in Glasgow, and practice has evolved greatly in supporting all women currently serving sentences in the establishment, or whether it's Glasgow Women Aid, Him at Greif, Glasgow East Women's Aid, they can provide up to 64 safe places for women and SAY women who support women 16 to 25, have 9 spaces in purposely built flats as well. So there's a range of initiatives. I'm happy to write to Douglas Ross with detail of how we're supporting Glasgow City Council and other local authorities in ensuring that they increase residential rehab, not decrease it.
Douglas Ross.
I don't know how the First Minister can possibly stand there and say he is supporting people who are struggling when a facility has closed after 20 years of supporting vulnerable women. And the government were involved. Emails that were published in the newspaper article today said that the tendering of 218 was with relevant ministers for review, and that another email
Members, let's hear Mr Ross.
Another email referred to the likelihood of needing ministerial clearance for any new approach. That's in the emails that have been published today. And during the SNP leadership contest, Humza Yousaf said, if there's more money we can give to alcohol and drugs in particular, then that's going to be a priority focus for me. Well, it's clear it's not a priority. Nicola Sturgeon cut funding for drug treatment in 2015 and drug deaths rose. This year, Humza Yousaf has cut the treatment budget in real terms. They promised to create hundreds of new rehab beds, but they've managed just over 30. The addiction crisis in Scotland is out of control. Since the SNP came to power, drug deaths have doubled. They are the worst in Europe, and new figures show deaths are increasing again. Scotland's shame has not gone away. Nicola Sturgeon admitted she took her eye off the ball. Hasn't Humza Yousaf done exactly the same?
First Minister.
No, Presiding Officer, I reject that in its entirety. Let's try to take some of the issues that Douglas Ross mentioned in his question. The drugs budget, of course, we have increased over the years. The increase of funding into drugs policy that we have presided over the last, for example, if I take 2014-15 to 23-24, that's a 67% increase in funding. That's by Audit Scotland figures that were recently published. The draft budget for 24-25 has maintained our budget for alcohol and drugs at the same level this year, and of course this year we've seen record funding, £130 million into alcohol and drugs partnerships. Douglas Ross references if there was more money. The point is, of course, we've had a £500 million real terms cut to our budget by the UK Government. If, of course, Douglas Ross is able to convince his colleagues south of the border to give further funding to Scotland, then I absolutely promise him that drugs and alcohol policy will be one of the areas that we look to give further funding to. In terms of the action that we are taking, again, I'm happy to write to Douglas Ross with more detail. We have, of course, ensured that there's greater carriage of naloxone, over 150,000 kits. We are working with Greater Glasgow and Glasgow City Council on more radical approaches, such as a safe consumption room. We are increasing numbers of beds in terms of residential rehab, and, as I say, continue to work with local authorities to help tackle this issue. I make that offer that I've made already to Douglas Ross, to others right across the chamber, that we are willing to work cross-party in order to resolve what is one of the most difficult challenges this country has faced, and an issue that has plagued our society, not just for years, Presiding Officer, but for decades.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I join others in wishing Muslims here and around the world Ramadan Mubarak? It's a month of fasting from sunrise to sunset, a month of reflection, thinking of those that are less fortunate, and a month of charity, and our thoughts are with all those living in poverty and in conflict at this time. I must say I'll have to battle dry mouth for 10 minutes. Fair play to the First Minister, who has to do it for 45 minutes this afternoon. Presiding Officer, it's been 4.5 years since the SNP government declared a drugs death emergency. Since then, over 5,200 lives have been lost in drug-related deaths. Every single one of them someone's son, daughter or loved one. In 2023 alone, 1,197 people died, a 10% increase on the previous year. And the response from the Drugs Minister this week was, the plan is working. But this is what Anne-Marie Ward, the CEO of Favour UK, said. They have the audacity to claim progress in this catastrophe. Their assertions are a slap in the face, a mockery of the grim reality we witness daily. How dare they feed us these blatant lies, expecting us to nod along while our communities are ravaged and our streets are lined with the casualties of their incompetence? Who is right? Are people impacted by drugs or the Drugs Minister?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, this government continues to engage with those who have lived experience and are on their recovery journey. The Drugs Minister and I did that just this week. Just yesterday we met with those with lived experience, those who are going through the recovery journey, not to spin, as has been suggested, but to directly front up what is an extremely challenging issue, and to say that we continue not just to listen, but to act. And that's what I say to Anna Sarwar and to Douglas Ross, that nobody in the government, neither myself nor the Minister for Drugs and Alcohol Policy, nobody in this government is neither complacent nor at all attempting to dismiss the very serious concerns that have been raised by Douglas Ross, Anna Sarwar, by parliamentarians across this chamber, and indeed by our stakeholders. But I can point to the fact that we are taking action. We are, for example, continuing to expand residential rehab. We are providing funding to community-based organisations. We are working with the likes of Glasgow City Council on more radical approaches, like safer drug consumption facilities. So we're not just doing the same thing. We're looking to see what more we can possibly do that's different. We're widening the access to naloxone. We're driving the MAT standards. Everybody knows how important same-day access to treatment is and can be. We're working on the rights of those who have lived experience through the National Collaborative. If there are particular interventions that Anna Sarwar and others want us to explore and examine, I give him an absolute promise that we do so with an open mind. But nobody in government, not me nor the Drugs Minister, are downplaying what is one of the most serious issues our country is facing.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, is repeated action of this government where we focus a lot on the inputs, but we don't actually look at the outcomes of government policy. Because what matters here is the outcomes. And the outcome is more people losing their lives to drugs. In Tayside, 83 people died last year. In Edinburgh, it was more than 2 a week. And in Glasgow, it was 6 people a week. In January 2021, the government set out targets to increase residential rehab beds. They promised 225 more beds by 2026. 3 years on, only 32 are operational. In 2022, the government said it would establish drug checking facilities. But 2 years on, no facilities are open and not a single licence application has been made. In what world does the First Minister think this plan is working, and how can he expect families who have lost loved ones to believe him when there doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency?
First Minister.
Again, I reject the accusation that there isn't a sense of urgency. There absolutely is a sense of urgency. Anas Sarwar started his question by asking what the outputs were. And he's absolutely right. Outputs are important. There is an increase in residential rehab beds, and I'll come back to the very specific point that Anas Sarwar made just shortly. The outputs of our actions mean that we have now better standards, I would say more urgent standards when it comes to access to treatment. The outcomes are that we now have over 150,000 naloxone kits that have been distributed, and indeed we know from Police Scotland figures that they've been used, naloxone has been used around about 500 times, which undoubtedly has in itself saved lives. That's an outcome and an output. In terms of course, checking facilities for drugs, my understanding is that they require a Home Office licence, and that's why we continue to work with Glasgow City Council and indeed engage with the UK Government in this regard. In relation to the point that Anas Sarwar makes, we are on track to meet our targets in relation to increased capacity of residential rehab. The investment that we've made is in 8 capacity projects that will provide an additional 172 beds by 25-26, and the further funding that we will provide in 25-26. We're very confident of meeting that 650 target by the end of the parliamentary term. I can give a breakdown in detail in writing if Anas Sarwar wishes of the investments that we made in residential rehab, but we are confident of not just meeting that target and output, but also the output on having 1,000 publicly funded rehab placements by, again, the end of the Parliament.
Anas Sarwar.
The outcome that matters is that drugs deaths should be falling, not increasing. That's the outcome that really matters here. Because despite everything that the First Minister has said, we have the exact same drug laws as everywhere else in the UK, but almost 3 times as many drugs deaths here in Scotland. The outcome we need this government to deliver is fewer people dying from drugs, not more and more people dying every year. Because it's been 4.5 years since the SNP government declared a drugs death emergency. 3 years since the launch of their national mission to reduce drug deaths, and almost 2 years since the final report of the Drugs Death Task Force. But yet, in the last year, 1,197 more people have died. Incompetence has consequences. It means Scotland has the highest rate of drugs death in Europe. And across Scotland, families are grieving loved ones whose deaths were preventable. But this government has failed on every promise it has made. Promises to increase rehab beds falling behind. Promises on drug checking facilities not delivered. Promises on new treatment standards broken. But all we've heard today are more of those exact same promises that aren't being delivered, and about a plan that is not working. Drug deaths are going up, not coming down. So I'll give him one last chance. What will he change to get a grip of this crisis and help save lives in Scotland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, we know that there are many parts of the world, and of course right across the UK in particular, where there are challenges with synthetic opioids, nitazines, fentanyl, and so on and so forth, which are more addictive, more potent, and therefore causing real harm and real concern right across the United Kingdom. That's why Anas Sarwar and Douglas Ross were both right to say that levels of drug deaths in Scotland are unacceptable and per head of the population higher than other parts of the UK. But we have, of course, seen increases in England and Wales, and I suspect it's largely down to the same issues that we're facing collectively, that we're seeing more addictive substances on our streets, such as synthetic opioids. I do say, once again, to Anas Sarwar, that not only are we taking action, he says promises have been broken around increasing residential rehab. They aren't. I'm giving Anas Sarwar the evidence, the detail, the facts, that the levels, the numbers of residential rehab beds have increased, and we are on track to meet our commitment towards the end of the Parliament. The same for publicly funded rehab places as well. And I can give an absolute guarantee, a promise to not just those in the chamber, but those that are listening, that where we can try innovative approaches, new approaches, then we will absolutely seek to do that. That's why we're supporting Glasgow with funding for the safer consumption room. It's why we're supportive of checking facilities for drugs and other interventions as well. And if we did have the power over the Misuse of Drugs Act, for example, we would seek to make changes in relation to the decriminalisation of drugs for personal use. And we've explored that issue because we know that intervention has worked in other countries. So I end, Presiding Officer, where I started. This government, of course, acknowledges the scale of the problem, the scale of the challenges, and rededicates itself to taking further action where we can, invest where we can, and work with anybody we possibly can to tackle this shameful and insidious problem in our society.
Question number 3, Gillian Mackay.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the current 40 Days for Life protests.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government believes that patients and staff should be able to access abortion services free from intimidation, free from harassment and free from undue influence. That's why we've committed to fully supporting the Abortion Services Safe Access Zone Scotland Bill that Gillian Mackay has introduced to the Parliament. As Gillian Mackay will be more acutely aware than anyone, the bill is currently being scrutinised by the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee, and I extend my thanks to Gillian Mackay for introducing the bill and to all the witnesses who have provided evidence to the committee thus far. So we'll continue to support the bill as it makes its way through the parliamentary process, and I'm hopeful its protection will soon be felt by women right across Scotland.
Julie Mackay.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Around the world in recent years, we've seen reproductive rights go backwards in countries such as the US, Poland and Brazil. But there are glimmers of hope, with rights expanding in Argentina and Colombia, and the rights in abortion being enshrined in the Constitution in France. Does the First Minister agree with me that safe access zones must be the first stop on advancing rights here in Scotland? And does he believe that we should go further, including providing abortion in Scotland up to the legal limit, ensuring equitable access to IVF and removing abortion from criminal law?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, first and foremost, I want to be clear that provisions and regulations of NHS abortion services within specifying term limits should absolutely be a clinical matter and not a criminal one. And I'm happy to look at that issue in further details. I know there are nuances and complexities in looking into that issue, opening up that issue, which again I'm happy to discuss with the member in due course. There have, of course, been improvements in the provision of later stage abortions within Scotland, with all mainland boards now providing abortion to at least 20 weeks gestation. But Gillian Mackay is right to push the government and health boards to see what can be done even further in terms of later term abortions. And I'm happy to ensure that the Health Secretary writes to her with further details of the actions that we are taking alongside health boards in this regard. Once the bill has made its way through Parliament, Gillian Mackay's bill, we will begin a review of abortion law, which will focus on identifying potential proposals for reform.
John Mason.
Thank you. Would the First Minister not accept that no one is being harassed at these vigils or protests? No one is being intimidated. It is largely a small group of elderly religious people standing at these facilities. And does he not think that we are slightly overreacting with legislation on this?
First Minister.
Look, I wouldn't agree with John Mason on that, I'm afraid. I think what's so important in this matter, particularly I have to say for men, is to listen to the voices of women. And women tell us and have given very powerful evidence and testimony that whatever John Mason's view may be, that they feel that harm is being done. They do feel harassed. They do feel intimidation. Now, even if John Mason was to, for whatever reason, discard that evidence, and I would encourage him not to, he should also listen to the clinicians at the services, the likes of Dr Gregor Irwin and many others, who have spoken very powerfully about the impact it's also having on staff. Now, John Mason knows that I'm a religious person myself. I pray. But where you choose to pray, you can pray anywhere in the world for whatever you want. Why you have to go to an abortion service where women feel then harassed and intimidated, I have to say I do not understand. And therefore I believe that legislation that Gillian Mackay is bringing forward is one that should have the support of this whole Parliament. We will certainly be supporting it from the Scottish Government. And I would say once again to John Mason, it's so crucial that as opposed to men perhaps imposing their view on what the impacts or effects on protests are to women, that John Mason would do well to listen to the voices of women and clinicians and staff at abortion services.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. These protesters are intimidating for women at what is undoubtedly a challenging moment in their lives. Given the waiting list pressures across the NHS, can I confirm if he has had direct discussions with health boards to ensure women can continue to access abortion services in a safe but, of course, a timely manner to avoid adding further anxiety to what is already a challenging time in their lives?
First Minister.
Carol Mockin is absolutely right to raise this issue, and we don't want anybody waiting longer than they have to for accessing healthcare. Particularly, we know over a range of issues that affect women in particular, the wait is far too long in relation to the discussions that have been had between the Government and health boards on a range of issues affecting abortion, access to abortion services, and perhaps some of the issues that were raised by Gillian Mackay, which Carol Mockin might have an interest in terms of later term abortion. I'm more than happy for the Health Secretary to write a detailed note to Carol Mockin, but she's absolutely right to raise the issues that she does, because nobody, and particularly women accessing health services, shouldn't have to wait a minute longer than I'm afraid they currently do.
Question number 4 has been withdrawn. Question number 5, Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government will take in response to reported statistics showing that nearly 1 in 5 probationary teachers left the teacher induction scheme in 2023.
First Minister.
The teacher induction scheme is an important element of teacher education. It guarantees every eligible student teacher a one-year probation placement to allow them to meet the standard for full registration. Probation numbers do fluctuate throughout the year due to deferrals, due to withdrawals, and this can be for a variety of reasons, including medical or indeed personal reasons, or extensions to the original initial teacher education qualification. The Strategic Board for Teacher Education, which is made up of a range of key education stakeholders, is looking at issues around teacher recruitment, increasing support for early career teachers, and also raising the profile of teaching as a valued profession.
Jamie Green.
I agree that it does fluctuate, but before COVID, the dropout rate was 13%. Last year, it was near 19%, so it is an alarming rise, First Minister. EAS believe that what is happening is that once teachers enter the workplace, they're just facing the harsh realities that many in the profession have known for some time: increased workload, less support for teachers and pupils, and, of course, a lack of permanent secure jobs for many probationary teachers. Of course, on top of that is rising violence and abuse towards teachers, something which I think concerns all of us. We already know that since the First Minister's own party took office, there are 1,000 fewer teachers in Scotland's classrooms. And we know the direct impact that has on both subject choice and class sizes themselves. So my question is this, First Minister: why does he personally think that so many probation teachers are dropping out of the profession so early in their career? But more importantly, what is his government doing about it?
First Minister.
I think Jamie Green is, of course, right to raise what is an important issue and one that will have cross-party interest. I think many of the reasons that Jamie Green gives for some of the reasons that we might see deferrals or indeed withdrawals from teaching are absolutely right. And the issues around violence in schools is an issue in particular that is high in our mind and high in the mind of the teaching profession. And again, I'm happy for the Education Secretary to write to Jamie Green with details of the actions that we're taking from, of course, the summits that have taken place, the guidance and the guidelines that we've provided schools and the support that we're providing in tackling that particular issue. We are also trying to ensure that teaching is an attractive profession. One way we're doing that, for example, is ensuring that teachers in Scotland are the best paid in the UK in terms of starting salary being the most attractive in the UK. We also have a number of bursaries that we're also providing for STEM subjects, but also for those teachers that do are willing to complete the probation anywhere in Scotland. There is the preference waiver scheme, which means that teachers can receive up to £8,000 if they are willing, as I say, to complete the probation anywhere in Scotland. We're also working with stakeholders in a joint campaign to encourage people to consider teaching as an attractive profession. So there are a range of issues that we're working on, and again, more than happy for the Education Secretary to write to Jamie Green with further detail of the actions that we are taking.
Question number 6, Jackie Bailey.
To ask the First Minister what urgent action is being taken to address long waits in A&E departments in light of reports that over 7,300 patients waited for more than a day in 2023, with some waiting much longer.
First Minister.
I do want to emphasise that all long waits are, of course, unacceptable. We continue to work hard with health boards to reduce delays for patients. A&E performance is impacted by pressures from right across the wider health and social care system, which is why our Unscheduled Care Collaborative programme is taking a very whole systems approach as we work with health boards in delivering sustained improvement. Through this programme, a whole range of actions are being taken to improve patient flows to reduce A&E delays. These include actions to strengthen arrangements to avoid unnecessary hospital admissions, such as same-day emergency care services, expanding our hospital-at-home services, and optimising flow navigation centres, and supporting patients to ensure that they receive the right care in the right place and trying to reduce the pressure on our very busy acute sites.
Jackie Bailey.
Can I thank the First Minister for his response? But in Esher and Arran, one patient waited at A&E for 122 hours. That's 5 days. At Borders General, it was 88 hours. In NHS Lanarkshire, someone waited over 72 hours. Consultants tell me, that patients are being treated on trolleys in corridors when they should be in a bed. And let's be in no doubt, these long waits are costing lives. First Minister, don't take my word for it. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine estimate that there were up to 2,000 excess deaths last year caused by patients waiting over 8 hours in emergency departments. That, frankly, is the national scandal. So can the First Minister explain what action will be taken now to tackle long waits at A&E departments before more lives are lost?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I'm not disputing with neither Jackie Bailey nor the Royal College of Emergency Medicine that there is undoubtedly a relationship between long waits and increased risk of harm, which is why we are absolutely committed to reducing those waits. I would say that some of the figures that were presented in the FOI were erroneous, not due to anything that Jackie Bailey has said, but I believe due to some coding or recording errors. Nonetheless, Jackie Bailey's point remains and remains correct that there are still people, exceptionally, not the rule, but exceptionally, that are waiting far too long to be seen in